No, it's not. That's Jesse Washington.
We are live watching some videos of lynchings that have taken place across the United States, and the pictures may be disturbing to you as well. They should be. These are humans that were murdered, either being tortured and burned or hanging from trees. This video is from YouTube, but we're talking tonight about lynchings in America and the impact of lynchings, and in particularly the lynching of Black women that many have never heard their stories or know anything about them. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. This is the Timbuktu Report. This is one of the women, um, may be Mary. Uh,
I already
she
know.
was she was hung. She was hanged from a bridge. Thank you for joining and watching. One of the reasons that we're showing this is because these are the stories that are not being told. These are the stories that are um, systematically eliminated so that we do not see and hear. And perhaps if we saw and heard more of these kinds of stories, it would help to soften the hearts of many to recognize the things that have taken place in this country. On the Timbuktu Report, our goal is to educate, to inspire, and to enlighten, and tonight is no different. My guest, Dr. Rick Stevenson, who is a professor of African American history and African American studies at the University of Florida. Dr. Stevenson, thank you for lending your time and your insight to this very disturbing story tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I have been providing my students with what I call factoids, Black History Month factoids, and I've been focusing this month primarily on the role of women, and lately specifically on the atrocious and heinous murders of Black women at the hands of white supremacist vigilantes.
Dr. Rick Stevenson is also a man of the cloth. And before we get deep into that topic, Dr. Stevenson is also always uh, taking us to the Lord in prayer. If ever we needed the Lord before, we sure do need him now.
Yes, we do.
Thank you.
Lord, thank you so much for another opportunity to share and to investigate and even interrogate history. We are attempting to exercise our scholastic skills and expertise to bring more insight and enlightenment to people and challenge not only the educational system in our societies, but just the historical narratives themselves, how they are used and have been used to drive a wedge between people groups. I pray that what we learned tonight might cause empathy in the hearts of those who have never heard this information before and draw us closer together. So we thank you for, again, for this platform. We try to use it as best we can to bring you glory and to enlighten those who are a part of this conversation. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Dr. Stevenson, these lynchings across the United States of America took place years after the Emancipation Proclamation. They were a very tactful tool used during the Jim Crow era. Um, why is it that you have elected to talk to your students about these lynchings, and
Well,
particularly of Black women?
primarily, I think traditionally history has been taught from a white male perspective. That's what it's called, history. But what about their story? What about her story? What about our story? What about the story? And so I think that part of my responsibility professorially is to educate our students with a broader perspective of a narrative that has multiple stories and multiple lenses. There is not one relationship where there's more than two people where there's only one story. And so therefore there has to be an aspect of other stories that we're not getting. Secondly, traditionally and historically, history is taught not only by white men, but about white men. and especially in the Black context, African American women and African women in diaspora have played a significant role in the contributions of everything we've done, from the Middle Passage to the plantation, to politics, to education. Black women have been a part of it. And so, therefore, I'm trying to help my students understand that even though there are government issues, there are government persons who want to destroy the way we teach history. It is important that they understand that multiple narratives make up the entire story. And to talk about Black History Month and not talk about women would be impotent.
And as we are speaking about women, the stories that were left out, in particularly the one of the African American woman who was lynched. She was 8 months pregnant.
Mary
So,
Turner.
Mary Turner, how can you tell the story of a woman who was 8 months pregnant, who was killed, and talk about what happened to her, and then explain how in the world can you hear that story and not see the wrong in that and the symbolism of the wrong that happened over and over again, like what happened to Mary?
Yeah, Mary Turner was married to a gentleman by the name of Hazel Turner. They called him Hayes. He was 19 years old, and he allegedly had committed a crime. And white vigilantes, the crime allegedly was he killed his master, his sharecropper. He was taken out to a riverbank and lynched, set on fire, and set on fire and lynched. Mary is pregnant. She's 8 months pregnant. She has two other kids, and she goes to the town to seek justice for her husband because she knows he didn't commit the crime. And the newspaper article said that her challenging white authority got them riled up. You can read this in the newspapers of 1918. They come and get her. They drag her out to the riverbed. They put a chain around her feet and they hang her in a tree upside down. And then they begin to douse her with gasoline and oil. They set her on fire. And while she begins to scream and cry because of her baby, someone takes a jagged edge knife. They cut the baby out of her womb and stomp the baby to death. Once she dies, once Mary dies, they cut her down, hang her right side up, and then for about an hour to 2 hours, they just shoot bullet holes in her dead body. So that's the story. Um, how people can do that, I think there's a couple things. One, when you talk about white supremacy, the first thing you have to do is you have to create a narrative where one group of people are human and other people are not. That's why you oftentimes hear terms like bestiality, you hear beast, you hear the term savage. Um, those kinds of terms are oftentimes used about African Americans so that white America or white people don't have to see us as human. Secondly, you pass laws that legislate this kind of inhumane uh, treatment. In 1680, there was a law passed called the Negro Act Against Guns. And the whole purpose of this act was to prevent African Americans from having access to firearms or any kind of weapon of offense or defense. Why? Because if you can't protect yourself, then the vigilantes can come into your neighborhood and take over. The third thing is, if you ever look at these lynching photographs, there are three things that really stand out. One, people don't hide their faces. Two, they're oftentimes very heinous. And three, there are oftentimes children there because these became festive events. And so these events were not just about lynching someone. It was a way of sending a message to Black people that you can't protect yourself because we have laws on our side, and a message to white people: this is okay. You can get away with it, and so you don't have to hide your face. And whenever you can get away with this kind of crime and there is no punishment, then people are not going to stop doing it. They're going to continue until we decide, hey, I'm going to protect myself, right? And that's when organizations like the Deacons for Self Defense, the Black Panther Party, the Black Dot Gang, and other organizations like that began to band together because we realized that the laws were not on our side.
And the message that it sends, here's a woman, Mary, standing up for her husband. She was killed, but that message was not just to her. That was to every other woman, to white women, because white women were silent too.
Exactly.
It sent a message to everybody that there's a group that's in control and there's not anything you can do about it.
And you know what's interesting about that? One there's a book called Southern Horrors: Lynch Law in All Its Phases, and it talks about that one of the things that white men were fearful of was that white women did find black men attractive, and it happened quite frequently. There's a narrative about a woman who had started having an affair with a black man, and she was fearful that she one of her neighbors saw him leaving the house. And so she was fearful that she might be pregnant. So when her husband came home from a long trip, she told him that the black man raped her. He goes to trial. He is sent to jail for 15 years. In the fourth year of his term, the wife comes clean and said, "You know what? I really lied. That's not really what happened. I was having an affair with the guy, and I was afraid that if you found out, you'd be upset." Now that wasn't uncommon, but the narrative was set that black men want white women, and just like people are believing the big lie about the stealing of the election, that same kind of concept of introducing a narrative over and over and over again becomes a part of the way you see the world. And so people would just assume that if a white woman got raped, it had to be a black person. You follow me?
Yeah, Dr. Rick Stevenson, our discussion tonight is about the trauma of lynching in America, the trauma that women, African American women, dealt with. How do you think that that has impacted women today, Dr. Stevenson?
Yeah. Can you do me a favor while I'm explaining
Sure,
this? Can you go
sure.
back to the one where there's the young lady hanging off the bridge?
Let's see here.
No, not that one. Keep
Yeah,
going.
I think it's
Dr. Joy DeGroy wrote a book called Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And that one, this right here. Now, you probably can't see that if you don't know what you're looking for, but it's actually two people hanging from that bridge. The
okay. So
woman is
there's
to your
one
right,
there.
and then
Yeah.
the other is her son. His name was JD. And what happened was, again, JD was accused of a crime and he was taken into custody. And then his mother was taken into custody. And then the next day, they took them, the vigilantes, broke into the jail, took the mother and the son, and hanged them both from this bridge. This is in Okima. I think this is 1916 or 1911, something like that. So, so here's the deal. So there is a trauma that black people experience that is so in intertwined into the way we live that it becomes normal to be stressed. We are very conscious that our black skin is a liability. We are very clear when we walk into various stores that the security guard's going to follow us. We know when we go to buy a car, if you're a woman, you should take a man with you. Why? Because the car dealers will try to take advantage of it. We know that black women have oftentimes been hypersexualized because of white ideology. So, so black women oftentimes have to internalize these fears, these concerns, these issues, and it causes them, in some sense, and I'm not a woman, so I don't know all of it, but it causes them to be even more tougher than they have to be because their femininity is oftentimes taken away from them by the dominant culture. And so you get the angry black woman, right? When in fact, if people would treat them with the same kind of respect they treat the white woman, we wouldn't have that issue. And here's the thing that bothers me: when black men treat black women in the same vein that white men treated black women in the South. Some of the rap songs, and they use calling our women the B word and calling them hoes and using all kinds of derogatory terms. We are now using the same kind of language about our women that they used about our women in the South. And I think that right there just turns my stomach.
And shame on every last note that is sang or played that tears the givers of life down.
Exactly.
Women give birth, they have the cellular authority to create life. Yet, we as women, and I see um, Kate Bradshaw, Darnese March, Sharon Benjamin, women who are making comments tonight, but shame on us for participating, and we should stage our own march, our own protest, because have we not gone through enough
Right.
that we allow our sons to
Right.
produce music that further tears us down?
Exactly. And I
Your
and
daughters, because
mhm,
you got some female rap artists with
mhm,
some nasty stuff
yeah.
that we're calling our own selves the B word.
And what is it that led us to buy into that, right?
Yeah,
And
what?
I don't know what it is. There was a book that there was a article that I used at a course I taught at another university, and the title of the article was "From Fly Girls to B Word and Hoes." And it's the notion that young black women were the debutantes, and they were educated, and they had poise, and for some way in our music system, they began to be seen as, talked about, used as these other things. And it's primarily about economics. And I got to say to you that there's not enough money on the planet for me to refer to a black woman in that language. Because, like you said, I have two sisters, I've got two granddaughters, I have a great granddaughter. And I got to tell you, my oldest sister, she's not mad at me anymore. But
And
she
you had a mother.
yeah, and she was upset with me because she had a hard time getting a boyfriend because they knew if they messed with my sister, it wasn't going to be good on them. So, I mean, that's how we were raised, to protect our women, not to denigrate them.
Tonight, we're talking about the trauma of the lynching of Black women in the United States of America, land of the free, home of the brave. But Black women were lynched, and the few that we know about is just a drop in the bucket of the many that took place that we never heard their stories, we never heard their names, but that the DNA of that trauma still exists. It, Dr. Stevenson, this use of lynching, and the lynchings were done without trial, not that it would have been right if there had been a trial to prove innocence. It's a group of people who get together and say, this is what we're going to do. And there's
Right.
not one person in the crowd that says, no, we shouldn't do this.
Exactly.
The thought process that exists kind of resembled what we saw on January 6th.
Oh, really? Absolutely. I was being facetious, honestly.
I
Do,
know.
do you know there's a book, well, a couple books I recommend, but there's one book called At the Hands of Persons Unknown. And this particular book is about lynching. And the reason that the author titled the book that way is because when a person was lynched, and if they were taken to an undertaker, the death certificate would read, because no one would tell who did the job, at the hands of persons unknown. And so this particular book is a collection of lynching. But there's another book called Slavery by Another Name, and it talks about this whole notion of how lynching and murder and vigilante murder was a way that white supremacists after the Civil War tried to regain their power. And it was how Jim Crowism was enforced. The
Mm.
whole purpose was to demonstrate that the sheriff is on our side, the magistrate is on our side. The DA is on our side. So it doesn't matter what you do, even if you didn't do it. And you know what's interesting? Ida B. Wells wrote a book called The Red Book. It's a collection of lynchings. And she discovered, and don't quote me on this, but if I'm not mistaken, anywhere between 70 to 75% of the lynchings that were when a person was accused of rape did not do it.
How many people are in jail today that
See?
did not do it?
See?
So that's not new either.
No, it's not. It's not.
Speak to how understanding um, the what lynching did to the psyche of America that still exists today.
Mhm.
If we truly understood that, what kind of impact would that have on helping to heal hatred and racism in the United States of America?
Yeah, I don't think that the average person really can comprehend what it was like to be a part of a lynch mob or to be one who was lynched. One of the things that Douglas talks about in his book, "Slavery by Another Name," he talks about postcards. And there's one postcard when there's a, I think you have a photograph of Jesse Washington. Jesse Washington was lynched. He was set on fire, and they allowed him to burn for so long that all you see is some of his limbs that have fallen off. They actually castrated him as well. The newspaper says that when they castrated him, they gave his genitals to some woman. But the in this particular instance, someone sends a postcard that says, "This is the barbecue that we had last night. That's me standing under the cross." That's Jesse Washington. And this gentleman right here leaning against the cross, he's the one I think who wrote the postcard. And it says, "We had a barbecue last night. This is the picture of the barbecue from last night. And that's me standing under the cross." And so people made money off of these postcards by selling them. So it became another way of economic enterprise by killing these people. In this particular lynching, there were 15,000 people there.
Mm.
And this gentleman, he was a young guy. He had special needs, and someone else was really, there was another person that they had as a primary suspect of the killing that he was accused of. And then once they lynched him, they found out that it wasn't him, it was someone else. But 15,000 people showed up. They sold tickets. They had trains that came into the city. Some of the businesses closed their doors so people could come out and watch this lynching. And I say that to say this, that lynching was not just about murder, it was a festival of whiteness. It was white, violent nationalism on display. And again, if you notice, and I don't think you can draw back from this one, there's an aerial view of this particular lynching, and there are so many people you can't even see the ground. And there's one shot where there is a young boy being held up, I'm assuming by his father, so he can see, because it was a festival. And so until the entire narrative is told, until people are able to really get into the experience of the trauma and the psychosis that comes from thinking that you might be lynched. Not even just being lynched, but just walking down the street knowing, dang, if I get picked up, I could die. We can't explain that. And that's another one of the reasons why I think that critical race theory is being attacked, because one of the tenets of critical race theory is telling stories.
Sharon Benjamin posted and we did a show on this.
Bessie Taylor.
Of Rissy Taylor
Hmm.
explores a little known terror campaign against Black women. Just as Black men were lynched, Black women face systematic sexual violence under Jim Crow.
Hmm.
We have, it is incumbent upon us to keep talking.
Hmm.
We have to humanize this.
Exactly.
Um, Even as we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, I think you pointed out, Dr. Stevenson, how romanticized the story of Dr. King has become as we
Hmm.
celebrate his birthday.
Hmm.
Not all that people went through and were going through and continue to go through.
Right.
I think it was James Baldwin who said, "To be Black in America is to live in a constant state of rage."
Exactly. Exactly. And you mentioned the lady mentioned Bessie Taylor. We know a lot about Rosa Parks because she didn't want to give up her seat. But her job for the NAACP was to travel throughout the South and help to examine and investigate egregious rapes of Black women by white men. That was her task. But they don't talk about that. They talk
Mm,
about her wanting to get off the bus. But what she really did was she talked to Ressie Taylor. She was the one who investigated her rape. So,
mm.
there are so many of these narratives that don't make it through the history books. And that's why the multiplicity of stories is necessary. Because if you don't know both sides of the narrative, if you and I have a conversation and then you leave the room and I start telling someone about our conversation, there's still half of the conversation missing.
Mhm,
You follow
mhm,
me? So
mhm.
how is it possible to study a country with indigenous peoples and Asian people and females and males and not have all those other stories? That's preposterous.
Hmm. But it works for somebody.
Yes, it does.
Dr. Rick Stevenson, we have been talking tonight about lynchings in America and, in particularly, lynchings of the African woman, the trauma that Black women still carry in their cells.
Mm.
What is it that Black women can do to regain their voice? I feel like Black women have lost
Yeah.
their voice.
I now that I think that answering that question is a little bit outside of my purview because I'm not a
Maybe I should invite some of these women on that are watching.
that's what you should do.
Sharon Benjamin. Um, yeah, how do we regain our voice?
Okay.
Because we truly have lost it.
I
And
think
boy, are
one
we quiet.
Yeah, I think there's one thing that can be done, and that is as Black men, we've got to get back to that place where we're standing for supporting, protecting, looking out, uplifting, and encouraging our women. I tell my wife every morning how much I love her, and my wife is intoxicating to me. She keeps me high, and if someone did something or even attempted to do something, it wouldn't be a good day. We have to keep our insurance paid up because if somebody mess with my wife, it's a rope. And I think that it is that kind of intimacy, that both intellectual and physical and financial and social intimacy, that has been lost. And I would argue primarily because of the role of electronics, technology, and social media. Because
But also still carrying this DNA of fear.
yeah.
I mean, the DNA of fear of what happens if I do. And if there's not a collective voice, I mean, there was speaking out against George Floyd, and now everybody going back to the house.
Well, like I said, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that question. I
Yeah, but I'm but
that's
I'm but I'm but I'm posing this for you, for all those who are watching, for all who are listening. We are, Dr. King talked about
hmm
the silence of us all as we're seeing things that are happening. If we understood the horrific terror of
yeah.
domestic terrorism that has existed, and even how it has played a role in domestic violence,
hmm
in women who are in homes who are being abused by people that they get in the bed with every night.
Yeah. Yeah.
How we are so silent about that
Yeah.
because nobody wants to tell on the person who's doing it because he has a certain title, or status in the community, or just out of just blatant fear.
Or we don't want people in our business,
Mm,
you know.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that right there, I remember years ago. It's been close to 30 years now. I did the funeral of a young woman who was killed by her husband, and I remember she was walking out of Bible study, and I said to her, "I said, you okay?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm okay, Pastor. It's it's going to be all right." And we talked, and I found out how she got to our church and stuff. About 4 hours later, I get a phone call. Her husband killed her,
Mm.
shot her in the head. And everyone knew he had been beating her, and no one said anything.
Happens every day in the United States of
Every day.
America. Sharon, that's a huge. She's in May 1870. 15 white men raped a black woman, while other members of the mob lynched her husband. Days later, in the same North Carolina community, another white mob raped a black woman and afterwards stuck their knives in various parts of her body
Hmm.
in this country.
hmm
And
And
hmm,
we have primary source data for this. That's another reason why critical race theory is being attacked. Because what is one of the primary folks of critical race theory? Examining primary source data. So now
yeah,
you can see why this thing is such a boogeyman.
there's a fifth commandment that those who hold up the word of God, whether it is upright or upside down, there is a fifth commandment in there that says, "Thou shalt not kill." And ladies and gentlemen, we cannot say that we're Christ followers and tell the truth if you are condoning of these kinds of things in your complicit silence. Dr. Rick Stevenson, thank you so much for
My pleasure.
sharing your insight, your wisdom, and your knowledge. Thank you all who are watching. Thank you all so much for sharing. There's so much healing that needs to take place, um, for so many of us in so many areas of our lives, and we don't even realize how these kinds of things are playing out in our day-to-day lives. So I do really, really appreciate
Thank you.
you for doing what you're doing, and for all of you for watching the Timbuktu Report tonight. The Timbuktu Report, it is a tool that we like to use to enlighten, to inspire, and to encourage, to continue to, wait a minute, not just read. That was a lie. Not just read, but we think. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV, and at the Wellness Radio TV, good help is hard to find. At the radio, at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at
At
the
the
well.
well.
Make it a fantastic moment. We needed to lighten it up a little bit, I guess.
I guess, right.
Good night.